Hello and welcome to the year 2019. Let's talk about all the big things that happened in 2019. First up, politically, if you go back to the 2018 lesson, one of the key things I touched on there was President Trump and his dealings with North Korea, specifically Kim Jong-un. Well, in 2019, they meet for a second time. And in these meetings, they agree to resume their nuclear negotiations. And Trump officially sets foot on North Korea. So when they had met before, it was not in North Korea. This time it was, which again, just like I talked about in 2018, just the idea of a sitting U.S. president meeting with a North Korean leader, broke a lot of precedents, was pretty historic, whether you were for it or against it. Either way, it was a big deal. Same, very much the same by setting foot in North Korea. So again, even though they agreed to kind of work on some nuclear restrictions in North Korea, to this day, nothing has really come of any of that. President Trump also called off a planned peace talks with the Taliban at Camp David. This was a surprise to many because, traditionally speaking, again, kind of like with North Korea, the United States did not negotiate with an organization like the Taliban, but they were going to meet, but those meetings were called off after the Taliban took responsibility for bombings in Kabul that took the life of a U.S. soldier. So very, very interesting stuff as far as dealing with foreign entities. So also in 2019, we finally get the end of the Mueller investigation. That was the special counsel investigation that was investigating any potential ties between the Trump campaign and Russian entities. So on March 24th, the Attorney General, William Barr, sent Congress a 4-page letter describing the conclusion of the special counsel's investigation in the 2016 campaign. The Attorney General got the report before it was released to anybody else, so that's why he was kind of providing this summary of what he found in the report. So basically, what the report said and what his summary of the report said was that Russia did, in fact, interfere with the election through disinformation and social media operations in the United States designed to sow social discord. Also by the hacking the emails of the Clinton campaign and other Democratic Party institutions. Attorney General Barr would go on to quote the report that the investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities. Barr would go on to write that the report did not draw a conclusion on obstruction of justice. And Barr would then go on to conclude that he and Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein decided that there was not enough evidence to support obstruction of justice. So that was the Attorney General's summary of the report as a whole, as it laid out. A few days later, on March 27th, Robert Mueller, the special counsel investigator, the person in charge of leading this whole investigation, sent Attorney General Barr a letter expressing concern that the Attorney General inadequately portrayed the counsel's conclusions. And he would say in that letter that there is now public confusion about critical aspects of the results of our investigation. So then in April, so about a month later, a redacted version of the Mueller report is released to the public, and it has 2 volumes. So if you actually were like super interested in this, you could go to a bookstore or probably Amazon. It'll be easier. But you could actually buy and purchase and read the Mueller report if you were so inclined. So volume 1, found that the investigation did not find sufficient evidence that the campaign coordinated or conspired with the Russian government in its election interference activities. The investigators had an incomplete picture of what happened due to communications that were encrypted, deleted, unsaved, as well as testimony that was false, incomplete, or declined. So one of the things that was pointed out was that some members of the campaign and some members that they were of the Russian government they were trying to look into either weren't being cooperative or they were providing false testimony or they weren't giving over adequate information that was being requested, things like that. Also, Volume 1 would say that Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election was illegal and occurred in a sweeping and systematic fashion. And even though the report did not say it was coordinated by the Trump campaign, the report did say it was welcomed by the Trump campaign. So they also identified links between the Trump campaign officials and individuals with ties to the Russian government. And several people connected to the campaign made false statements about and obstructed investigations. Then Volume 2 addressed whether or not the president, once President Trump, once he was in office, obstructed justice. If you remember, if we talk about it, think of as obstruction of justice, especially when it refers to a presidential investigation, we tend to think of Nixon and Watergate. And even though there was no true connection between Nixon and the burglars that broke into the Watergate compound, Nixon was involved in the cover-up of that investigation into that break-in, and so he was really, in that whole thing, he was guilty of obstruction of justice by being complicit in the cover-up of that. So then, if we look into Volume 2 of the Mueller report, as far as it related to President Trump and potential obstruction of justice. The investigation followed the precedent that a sitting president is immune from criminal prosecution. So the special counsel investigation concluded that they could not charge President Trump with obstruction because he was a sitting president. It did state that it did not conclude that the president committed a crime, but it also did not exonerate him. So basically what they did in this volume was lay out 10 instances where there was a potential that the president could have obstructed justice while he was president, and one that happened before he was president. One of those was that they said that he privately tried to control the investigation. So that would be something like, when he fired the FBI director, James Comey, other conversations he might have had with top officials that would have potentially been involved in the investigation, things like that. The report did say that Congress should be the one to decide whether or not Trump obstructed justice and take action accordingly, i.e. like impeachment if they believe that he did obstruct justice. So he was kind of following the same path. There was a special counsel investigation put together for Watergate back in, if we stay with the Nixon comparison, and that special counsel investigation did something very similar. They kind of gathered the evidence, they knew that they could not indict a sitting president, so they gave the evidence to Congress, and Congress then was going to go ahead with impeachment proceedings. Now, Nixon resigned before that could happen, so the Mueller investigation was following that kind of same precedent that was set by that the Watergate investigation. So they kind of gathered the evidence, gave it to Congress, and left it in Congress's hands whether or not to do anything further. And Congress in this instance did not decide to do anything further. So that wraps up that whole period of the investigation into potential ties between the Trump campaign and Russia. Now, in 2019, we did have impeachment proceedings, not for the Mueller investigation, but this one dealt with Ukraine. So there was a phone conversation between President Trump and the president of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky. The transcript of that phone conversation was leaked. And in that conversation, Trump urged Zelensky to investigate potential corruption of former Vice President Joe Biden and his son Hunter Biden, who sat on the board of a Ukrainian energy company. The reason that Trump would have wanted this information was because Biden was most likely going to be a candidate in the 2020 presidential election. That call took place days after Trump blocked $400 million in military aid to Ukraine. So the question that was kind of posed in the impeachment proceedings was, did Trump break the law by soliciting a foreign government's help to dig up dirt on a political rival? So the whole question was this kind of a quid pro quo? Quid pro quo is a fancy way of saying this for that. So the idea that was Trump holding this $400 million in military aid kind of ransom in return for dirt on his potential future political opponent. So that was kind of what those impeachment proceedings ended up being about. So Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi announced that the House was going to start a formal impeachment inquiry into this matter. And the House drafted 2 articles of impeachment against President Trump, one for abuse of power and the other for obstruction of Congress. And on December 18th, the House passed both articles of impeachment, and President Trump officially became the 3rd president in U.S. history to be impeached. The impeachment trial in the Senate will not take place until January of 2020. I'll talk more about that in the 2020 lesson. But spoiler alert, he was acquitted of both charges in the Senate. So if you remember how impeachment works, a president is impeached by the House. They then go to trial in the Senate, and then the Senate either basically decides to keep them in office or remove them from office. So in this case, in 2020, Congress is going to decide the Senate is going to decide to keep him in office. So if you remember now, so like it says here, Trump is the 3rd president in U.S. history to be impeached. The first was Andrew Johnson, who took over after Lincoln was assassinated. The second was Bill Clinton in the 1990s, and then Trump became the 3rd. Sadly, in 2019, we see more mass shootings. One took place in El Paso, Texas, where a 21-year-old gunman opened fire inside a Walmart. 23 people were killed. 23 more were injured. The shooter was targeting Latinos in this instance, and it was the deadliest attack on Latinos in modern U.S. history. And kind of the questions around this shooting was, was this a case of domestic terrorism? Was it a hate crime? So on and so forth. And then there was one close to us here in Ohio, in Dayton, Ohio, where a 24-year-old gunman opened fire outside of a nightclub, killing 10 people, injuring 27 more. And officers responded to this shooting within 32 seconds of the first shots being shot and fatally shot the gunman. So this raised a lot of questions like, it's hard to respond a lot faster than 32 seconds. And in that time, this person is still able to kill 10 people and injure 27 more in just 32 seconds. So again, like we've mentioned in the past with, mass shootings, this raises the debate even further of should there be any new gun control restrictions placed. So that debate kind of anytime one of these shootings happens, that debate comes about. You might remember Jeffrey Epstein and especially the memes that they were kind of the one of the big things that took place in 2019. So Jeffrey Epstein was a financier who was arrested in July of 2019 on charges of sex trafficking and conspiracy to engage in sex trafficking. He would go on to die in jail, and his death would officially be ruled a suicide. However, many people would question on whether or not his death was actually a suicide or a homicide. And that was what those memes were about. The Epstein didn't kill himself memes became kind of the big toast, I guess, of 2019. And the reason that this was such big news was because of the high-profile connections that Epstein had. Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, Prince Andrew, Bill Gates, many other celebrities and politicians as well have had at one point connections with Jeffrey Epstein. So kind of the connotation there was, if he were to be able to speak, if he were still alive and kind of tell his tales, who all would be implicated in potential illegal activity, especially, like I said, celebrities, high profile politicians and such. So that's where that kind of a lot of the rumors that he potentially did not commit suicide largely came from. And stuff, we still see stuff to this day, 4 years later, in the news and still coming about yet today. All right, some other major events of 2019. There was the celebrity college admissions scandal, where a few famous celebrities were caught paying big money to fake test scores for their kids in order to get accepted into those colleges. Scientists from the Event Horizon Telescope project announced the first ever image of a black hole in the center of the M87 galaxy. Look at this. That is a black hole. First ever photograph of one. Pretty cool. And Julian Assange, who is the founder of WikiLeaks, he was arrested after spending the previous 7 years in the Ecuador embassy in London. So he was kind of wanted for those 7 years, and that's why he was hiding out. Finally arrested in 2019. These are all the people that we lost, or I guess not all, but some of the prominent people we lost in 2019. Famous poet Maya Angelou, former presidential candidate, third-party candidate H. Ross Perot. If you remember back in the 1992 presidential election between Bill Clinton and George H.W. Bush, he received 19% of the popular vote, which was a very large total. And we lost Grumpy Cat. Love me some Grumpy Cat memes. So Grumpy Cat passed away. Peter Mayhew, famous for playing Chewbacca in the Star Wars movies, he passed away. Famous director John Singleton passed away. One of my all-time favorite movies is Boys in the Hood. He directed. Famous Red Wing Captain Sid Abel passed away. This is Rick Ocasek. He was the lead singer of The Cars, if you've ever heard of that rock group, The Cars. He passed away. And Luke Perry. I know him from Beverly Hills 90210. You might know him more from, say, Riverdale. But Luke Perry passed away, as did Carol Spiney, who played Big Bird for many, many, many years. So we lost him in 2019. So long. All right. Checkpoint. Which of these presidents has not been impeached by the House of Representatives? So which one is not? President Trump, President Nixon, President Andrew Johnson, or President Clinton? And yes, President Nixon, believe it or not, is the correct answer. Remember, he resigned before he was impeached. So he was never officially impeached. Would have had he not resigned, but he resigned, so he was not impeached. Why didn't the Mueller investigation draw a conclusion on whether President Trump obstructed justice? Was it because there was a lack of evidence? Because they did not want to make the president mad at them? Because they thought the investigation was taking too long and they just gave up? Or was it because they were following a precedent that a sitting president is immune from criminal prosecution? I always think it's tough when you say precedent and president in the same sentence. But that is correct. That was the precedent that they were following. All right, that's 2019. Guess what? Max was born in 2019, another big major event. So this was him as a little baby. That's us taking naps together. That's us being sports fans together. And look at how little. Oh, these pictures make me miss those days. All right, have a great day, everybody. Thank you.